I didn't want to deal with life, you know. I didn't want to have to go out there and face life. I just wanted to stay in bed all day.
I couldn't function. I couldn't put two thoughts together in a logical way.
There were times that I would sit in front of my computer to work, and I would literally stare at it for an hour before I could actually do anything.
I was verbally abusive to people around me.
And the only emotion that I showed them was anger.
I had a high degree of anxiety. I felt a sense of loss of self-worth.
I don't think about anything. I don't want to move. I don't want to eat. I don't want to do anything. Just leave me alone.
Men who were executives, soldiers, pastors, journalists, laborers, musicians and students. Men of all ages, races, and backgrounds. Many of them have an illness, and most of them don't know it. It's a potentially fatal illness that torments both its victims and their families. How is it possible, in the country leading the world in medical science, that several million men will have an often disabling illness, and most of them will never receive treatment for it? Any guy would feel down after becoming ill, losing his job or a loved one to divorce or death. But how does he know he's depressed? How can he tell the difference between grief, stress, and sadness caused by life's setbacks, and having an illness that may need medical treatment before it gets worse and possibly spins out of control?
I'm turning 40 here in a few months, and I'm thinking, I don't know, maybe I'm having a midlife crisis. I don't know.
Depressed men often believe that the way they feel is just the way life is.
Okay.
It's not going to change.
You don't see the
And because they never seek treatment, their life hurt's sense of reality is never challenged.
I've been suffering from depression, it seems like to me, for, I don't know, 8 or 9 years now. I don't feel like I'm suicidal or anything, but I feel like, I'd just rather not wake up in the morning the next day. I'd rather be dead, but I don't feel like killing myself or anything like that. But I just wish that, my wish is that God would just let me die in my sleep or something. And no one wants to talk about that, you know what I mean? And I feel uncomfortable talking about depression in certain situations. And even though I know that a lot of people are feeling it, this is my real deal is depression is weakness, okay? Depression means I'm weak.
I did not have a name or a term to put on what I was feeling because I didn't know what I was feeling. I was verbally abusive to people around me, and that I could very easily start isolating, go sit in front of the television, pull the curtains, get some emotional food like ice cream, and sit there and shut the world out.
People just felt like I was ready to snap. I remember being a teenager and just tearing apart my room, just going absolutely nuts, knocking stuff over, breaking things that I had just bought. I remember people saying, well, why are you so angry? And I had been living with it for so long, it was just part of me.
Depression clobbered me when I was publisher of the Los Angeles Times.
While rising to the highest level of two of the world's leading media companies, Tom Johnson was living with a terrible personal burden.
I found it very difficult to awaken in the mornings. Very difficult to get up and out of bed in the mornings. And I really just was down. Really so down. But I kept it very secret. I did my best to continue as a strong, dynamic leader on the surface, to put up that front. But beneath, I was going through great agony.
As far back as he can recall, James struggled with a negative attitude that undermined his self-confidence.
That cancerous attitude, that self-defeatist attitude where, you can go out there and conquer the world, but then there's that voice say, who are you, to conquer the world? You can't do that. And it's always there. Then I went to Iraq, and that's when I really started to notice that there was a problem with depression. The The whole time I was there, there's no one I could really be open with, because no matter what you're feeling, no matter what you're going through, mission first. It was always, hoorah. People are gonna be shooting at us and trying to blow us up, go for the gusto. I kept telling them, I'm having problems. And it's like every time you talk to someone in a war environment, they assume you don't really have a problem, you just don't wanna be here. I went to the chaplain a couple of times, and basically his advice was, you're not going anywhere, so, deal with it.
Like many men with combat experience, Hugh was shaken when long repressed memories of Vietnam suddenly returned.
In Vietnam, we were always very susceptible to rocket and sniper attacks. One particular night on guard duty, a sniper opened up, and I could see the muzzle flash up on the hill I knew right where the person was. And I just blew the bejeebers out of the whole area. And I know in my heart that I killed him. Part of the hypocrisy in life is that I'm called to stand in front of people to list these rules from the Almighty. And I'm also one of the people that has broken one of the major ones. Maybe what I am is angry with myself. Let us pray it in unison. It's like I dream about going down a staircase and it just keeps going and going and going. And you think I've got to hit bottom, but you never do.
When Eric Hipple was starting quarterback for the Detroit Lions, he had ample reasons to feel as good as any athlete playing at the highest level of his sport. But he didn't.
I'm in the height of my career. Things ought to be great. They ought to be wonderful. And yet, I'm miserable. I call it absenteeism, where actually you're there, but you feel like you're not there. Like where things become like overwhelming, and all of a sudden you get like brain lock, you can't go forward, you can't go backwards, and you get caught in this place, you just don't know what to do next. And so, you try and fight through it, but then sometimes by doing that, you just end up getting like deeper and deeper down. And so then you almost kind of give up. Like for me, it's really hard to explain to Shelley. She doesn't have these, this thing going on. So it's really hard for me to explain to her what it's like to, when you just don't feel like, you just
Depression undermines confidence in one's judgment and abilities, one's worth as a person, and for some, even their reason for living.
My performance at work did start to suffer because of the state that I was in with the depression. I didn't even want to have contact with people on the telephone. So you can imagine a newspaper reporter, trying to do his or her job, not wanting to have any contact with anybody.
Nice shot.
The depression affected every aspect of my life, at work, all the relationships that I had, and the marriage also. The more Claire tried to help me, the more I pushed her away. We did marriage counseling, and I was the resistant one always. I thought that things were not going to get better, and that it didn't matter how much we worked at the relationship, that they were not going to get better, they were only going to get worse, that I was not going to be a positive influence in the relationship, either with Claire or with the boys. I told Claire and the kids that I thought they would be better off without me in the home, and so I moved out, left, and was living by myself. I really had virtually no contact with anybody except for when I went to work. I really reached the point where I thought that the only way to end what I was going through was to take my own life.
At its worst, it was like, hang on from 1 hour to the next hour, just wishing somebody would put you out of your misery.
I really thought of checking out. I just felt like I can't find an answer to this.
I actually physically went through purchasing a gun and toying with the idea of putting it in my mouth.
I had a few of those episodes that were real serious like that, and that's why I don't own a gun anymore. So.
In that apartment, I basically set up everything that I needed to do to hang myself. I really was serious about doing it, and when I reached that point where I could have done it, I stepped away. I really think that what happened was that in the back of my mind, I was thinking about my sons and thinking about them growing up not only without a father, but growing up with the father who left them the way that I was planning to leave them, and what effect that would have on them.
The time that was hardest for the boys was when we separated. The kids basically felt that somehow he was rejecting them, and I think our younger son was very hurt, and our older son was very angry.
Men living with depression are often unaware of the pain they inflict on others who are close to them.
We had had such an incredibly warm and close relationship his whole growing up years. We did everything together, and I felt like I understood him so well, and then all of a sudden, I didn't know him anymore, and he didn't want to be known by me anymore, and it was horrible.
You know, I was really acting out against my parents in school, and, you know, I would basically just do my own thing and just disregard authority in general.
We thought that, you know, he was just growing up and there was the natural rebellion that many teenagers go through.
When it became actual anger and there was hostility sort of involved in conversations, that seemed more than what was expected.
You know, I think that had a lot to do with my own feeling of, you know, not really being worth anybody's time, and school wasn't worth my time because I wasn't good at it. I never felt like I could quite measure up, feeling like, you know, why even put the effort into something that I can't achieve?
Living alone for the first time since his marriage and grieving his wife's passing, the structure Bruce had relied on for most of his adult life was now gone.
A lot of men, as they age, particularly during retirement and after, experience a significant decrease in their level of activity, their connection to friends and family. You know, a lot of them experience a kind of their own version of an empty nest syndrome. It's kind of, what do I do now? And there can be a sense of meaninglessness or sort of question about purpose in life that puts a person at risk for depression.
And then since my wife passed away and since I'm on my own, I've had quite a few numerous dips that don't quite reach the bottom of the road, but they scare the heck out of me.
Hello. Do I hug you on your non-beeping side?
Don't worry about it.
Am I going to get beeped at?
It might.
What beeper? His hearing aids beep. Oh, your hearing aids?
My first memory of his depression is here at Christmas time, when he stopped the whole table's conversation by telling everybody Christmas morning what it felt like to be depressed.
When you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you can't sleep, you can't get back to sleep because you're, as I put it, your wheels are spinning. All single ideas are running through your brain, and your stomach hurts, and you can't eat, and you lose 10 pounds in a week. You know there's something major wrong.
And he literally could not get off the sofa. He was just paralyzed with the depression.
You get depressed, you're depressed. It's like living in hell. If that's hell, I don't want to go there.
Early signs of depression include feeling hopeless, worthless, and helpless to do anything about it, not just for a day or so, but for weeks on end. Depressed men say they have no energy, sometimes because they can't sleep. Normally active men become passive and withdrawn and sleep through the day. They can't concentrate, become forgetful, and avoid making decisions. Family members report irritability, anger, and impulsiveness that strain relationships. Depressed men isolate from friends, coworkers, and their families. When they sense that life is passing them by, and as worries increase about losing control of their lives, they become anxious. They may have headaches, chronic pain, or digestive disorders that don't respond to treatment. The accumulation of physical and emotional pain may bring thoughts of death and even suicide. While it is only human to experience some of these feelings from time to time, to experience several together for more than a few weeks may indicate a need for professional care.
If a person is suffering from depression and friends and family recognize that, there's several things that they can do. probably the most important is to not sort of buy into this code of silence about it, but rather to talk about it openly.
Even when confronted with the hard truth, it may be difficult for depressed men to accept it. Instead, they may regard a loved one's effort to help as criticism, retreat into themselves, and shut loved ones out.
My wife calls it rageaholic. I would just be like, you know.
Where you guys going? I mean, I always felt like I was walking on eggshells. Come home, was he going to be Mr. Wonderful, or was he going to be a bear? You know, I'm out of here. I can't take it anymore. You're driving me crazy. In desperation, I was saying to David, we got to do something. This is just out of control, you know? And he wasn't having any of it.
She actually told me the truth, that I'd been really miserable to live with, that she had actually thought about leaving, you know, with the kids.
Men raging out against the world are often raging in against themselves, persistently repeating a judgment that they are weak and fearing they will be scorned if they ask for help.
You make decisions that you probably wouldn't make normally. And like there are a lot of impulsive behavior, a lot of, you know, stuff, thrill seeking and stuff like that I did anyway. And I didn't suffer the consequences all the time. A lot of other people might have. You know, I look back and some of the things I did to try and achieve happiness, obviously, you know, weren't the best decisions in the world. My thing of choice was alcohol, pretty much, you know, had been for a long time.
I'd either numb out by engaging in substance use, or I would go on, you know, these intense, you know, like spending kinds of things. So I'm well aware of that. And the other one, really, at least, you know, the one that destroyed my first relationship, my first marriage, was philandering.
I would feel so sad, or I would feel so upset, or I would feel so angry that it was just better to shut all of that off. And that was really why I did alcohol and I did drugs. It was this overwhelming sense of if I could just fill in the blank, I'd be okay. You know, people would like me, women would like me, my family would like me. You know, I wouldn't feel like the lone stranger.
It got to the point where I would just look for different substances that would take me away from the depression.
We knew that he was making a lot of wrong choices, that he was living in a very scary place, and frankly, those were the darkest days of all, because we literally did not know if he was alive or dead.
Moise has struggled alone against depression for many years, drinking to dull his pain.
I think alcohol and depression, go together.
His daughters remember growing up in a home with a father who was present only in a physical sense.
I didn't see him as a father because he just was total hopelessness, withdrawn. He was just he was physically a person that was in the room, but there was no conversation there. There was no involvement. And to me, I really thought he didn't care, or he just didn't love us, or didn't love us enough.
You can have a family, you can have everything, and you inside you don't believe you have the family. They used to, I think they used to hate me, you know.
Depression strains existing relationships and makes it difficult to form new ones.
I've had several relationships where they're like, you know, why can't I just get close to you? And I've sort of kept them at arm's length.
We dated until about the end of January, and that's when we broke up. So we were together about 9.5 months. He would often say that there were things about him that if I knew, I wouldn't feel that way about him. And as things went along, he started to pull back and withdraw.
Because I don't want to get too attached, because I know that the other shoe's about to drop and they're gonna get a better offer or find somebody better.
Returning from Iraq to his wife and children brought new and unexpected stresses that James was unprepared for.
I wasn't doing much to help out my situation at all. I was just kind of sitting there sulking. All of a sudden, it was my wife who was, making all the money, and I wasn't. My wife, she'd be crying, and she'd be on me, and she'd be like, well, how you do this? And I didn't care. It's like I wasn't even there. It was like nothing bothered me. And she would say, you're cold. I was like a stone, and I was, and I realized that. And I kind of hated that, I wanted to feel bad. I wanted to feel something. And you're like, I can't help it.
I feel like I'm banging my head against a wall, but I don't know how to get through to him, and it's really, really not good. It's really painful for all of us.
It's just as difficult to love a person with depression as it is to live with depression yourself.
When we became the enemy, and he really was treating us as his enemy, and that was a horrible, uncomfortable way to live.
And I just, felt like I was the heavy here. I'm having to hold up everything, where he's going the other way. I would just lose my patience, just like enough.
First of all, I was in total denial of, of anything that was going on.
Think of 10 as you're functioning 100%. Think of when you're functioning 10%.
I actually started going to a doctor, but it's kind of hard to make a diagnosis when you're drinking quite a bit and stuff, and along with it, just not listening to them, and that's kind of like where my mind was at.
I don't know if I told you, I talked with
Claire had been telling me for years that I needed help.
I did think John was depressed. I did try to figure out a way to help him recognize that and recognize that it was something that he could get help for. It was just difficult for him to hear it, and it was difficult for me to know how to say it in a way that was effective, because clearly nagging wouldn't be helpful.
I thought about being depressed and being unhappy or being sad, but I thought about that as the natural state for me. So it wasn't a matter of an illness.
Edwina, my wife, was the first to really look at me and said, there is something wrong with you, Tommy. You need to see a doctor. I just told her I was not going. I had always worked my way through my problems, whatever they were.
Real men do get real depression, just as they get real hypertension, sometimes real cancer, sometimes real diabetes, other issues. They do get depression, and coping with those requires real strength.
A lot of obstacles stand between men and treatment for depression. By far the biggest is stigma, causing men to feel ashamed for having a mental illness.
Growing up in the inner city, you don't discuss emotional things with other people. The stigma was there. You'll be classified as crazy or, loony.
In Hispanic cultures, particularly men have a harder time admitting to having emotional issues. I come from a religious family, and there's always this idea that, everything can be cured with prayer, which I'm not saying prayer is not powerful and helpful, but they tend to discount any other alternative.
When you talk about mental health, you say, you go to mental health, no, it's local, it's crazy.
Being Asian makes it harder to seek out help, because there's a cultural belief that goes like this. If you have a mental illness or a psychological illness, you're actually being punished for something that you may have done or your ancestors have done. So from that perspective of things like honor and saving face, where is there room for a man to say he's in pain? It's very, very difficult.
I guess being black, depression is really not brought up as, if you're A, B, and C, then you're depressed. I thought I was probably just, weak, or I was probably just, not man enough to handle it.
I already felt different from everybody else. Recognizing depression was going to be one more thing that was going to separate me from everybody else.
I was very, very reluctant to go to a psychiatrist. I think that for many in corporate America and in other positions, that knowledge that you have depression, knowledge that you have a mental health condition is too often used against you.
And so I was really afraid of people knowing that I was going through what I was going through. I didn't want anyone else to know that. I was embarrassed about it.
You can run from your pain, and you can run for it for a long time, but there are some things that just happen in your life where the pain is just so great, and you do one of two things. You either die, or you decide, it's gotta be better. And so I hit that. For me, it was, it was survival. I needed to do that, not just for myself, but also for my children.
It's unusual for a man to walk into a clinician's office and say, "Doc, I'm depressed."
We men try to be more independent and try to kind of, tough it out, so to speak.
The reason they don't want to go to the doctor is they're afraid they're going to find out something's really wrong. Right? And we've heard this in our research too, which is the reason I don't want to talk to a mental health professional is what if I found out I'm really wacko?
Determined to work things out on his own, Hugh relied on his faith and soldiered through the darker days as he'd been trained to do. But a crisis finally caught up to him.
In 1986, I lost it all. And those that were here at that time remember the night. Because it happened during this season of the year. It happened during Lent. Which, of course, is the 6 weeks before Easter, and we're called on to really do some self-evaluation. And when I did that, I kept feeling darker and darker and darker and more worthless until the final breakdown came at a church service and was hospitalized. And during one of those sessions with the psychiatrist there, we talked about war and how hard that had been, everything, and everything came flooding back in. My illness, a brain disease known as depression. I hadn't really thought of it as a disease or a physical ailment.
Depression is a brain disorder, but it affects the entire body. We're now screening people in our cardiovascular center because the risk of dying from a myocardial event, a heart attack, is 3.5 to 4 times greater if one is also depressed.
I finally reached a point where I knew that I was in serious trouble, that I needed help, that that if I wanted to get better, I was not going to be able to do it on my own. And it's not just a matter of responsibility.
He came in for one session and was probably one of the most profoundly depressed men I had ever met. He could talk and he could tell me what was going on with him and how unhappy and dysfunctional and falling apart his life was. But he didn't move very much. He had very little facial expression. And he was truly, as his story unfolded, in a very, very bad place.
That was really the first time that I really started thinking about this as an illness and something that could change. She was the one who really enabled me to see and to understand what I was going through and what I needed to do to deal with it and to make it better. Things have been pretty overwhelming.
And he was able to open up and tell me how badly things were going with his life, with his marriage, with his family, with his work, and how negative and bleak everything was inside of him. And in that letting go, he really was able to reach out and actually ask for help. This was so foreign to him.
After completing his tour in Iraq, James finally was able to find the help of a psychotherapist at an army hospital in Germany.
I was at a point where I really, had a lot to say, and I wanted someone to listen. That was the best thing, because I got to tell him about everything. I told him about, how I felt during the war. he let me know that what I was saying was confidential, so I didn't have to worry about it getting out. And he told me, don't let the military think that you're, less of a man because you have these feelings. He made me feel more adequate, I guess, more adequate as a man. So, he started the process of healing for me.
That's what a therapist is someone that you can open up to and tell that person what you're thinking inside, how you're feeling about it, what kind of things you're doing in your life. It's like opening a little window into yourself.
The right kind of talk therapy would help because I have so many things that I need to get out of my mouth from the dreams I have every night. I think it would help me. It's just I'm so picky about whom I'm spill my guts to and allow it to control my mental strings. So that's scary for me.
It's even hard for him to talk about it to me. And he may talk to his family somewhat, but I don't know that he really lets loose of the things like he was saying deep down inside that he really needs to get out. Maybe if he could get help somehow, just learning to communicate it, just so I can better understand him, because it is hard to support if you don't understand what's going on. Eat your eggs, buddy. Fork, please.
Not that I have anything against therapists, but we're not able to do. And it's like...
It's all financial.
It's all financial.
I see it as sort of a tragedy when you have someone, especially a man, get to the point where they finally say, okay, I need help. I need to do something about this. And they try to do it, and there are these obstacles in their way.
I'm Philip Lucas, and welcome to our...
Affordability of mental health care is a major obstacle for people without health insurance, and for others with policies with limited or no coverage for treatment of depression. Pierre's search for affordable treatment brought him to a health fair, sponsored by a group offering a confidential depression screening and referrals to mental health services for the uninsured.
How long has this been going on with you?
9, 10 years maybe.
Okay. So you've not been to see a mental health professional at all during the period?
Yes, I've been referred to a few psychiatrists or mental health places, but I didn't follow through or just wasn't comfortable with situations.
Many times men don't follow through, especially African American men, and the issue of depression is so important in our community. So
there's a variety of different ways that one can go about getting help. Exercise is helpful. Talking to friends and family members, seeking support from community members, whether it's a priest or other religious figure, friends at work, co-workers.
While many men can and do benefit from support provided by family, friends, colleagues, and clergy, some men with depression may need more. Professional help should be recommended to anyone at risk of harming themselves, damaging family relationships, or losing their livelihood.
How does one express psychological pain? And how does one express emotional pain? That is not an easy thing to do to begin with. We can always very easily answer how we're thinking. It's not always as easy to talk about how we're feeling. And so that, I think, becomes even more difficult for a Hispanic man.
You know that when you go to a doctor, they ask you what your symptoms are and why you are going over there. It was harder to me to tell, I was ashamed, so...
Con toda la construcción.
Con toda la construcción.
Que hay aquí en esta cuadra.
When he finally opened, it cost him a lot to talk about it because he likes to keep things for himself.
Is there something in particular that you would like to be able to cover in our therapy sessions? I know it's hard, but if you want to answer that in Spanish, you can do that too.
How to manage situations, really tough situations. How can I deal with problems.
But look, Javier, it's perfectly natural to think.
At the beginning, when we start, I was nervous. After a few weeks, I started feeling better. I ain't gonna say that it was right away, but I noticed the difference. In my life, it was a living hell. And by being treated with him, it helped me not just a lot, gave me my life back.
Mira, está saliendo, míralo. We almost lost the relationship, but once he find help and he follow the treatments and he put a lot of his part, now it's a lot better, working really good now. Especially with the kids.
If you asked Americans, you would discover that most of them think that depression is a disease of middle age or even the elderly, and it's actually not so. The age of onset peaks between 15 to 24. One adolescent is not the same as another. Some will start with irritability and just occasional dips in grades and pulling back from friends for a while, and then it will pass. Others begin with more serious manifestations. They experience sadness and withdrawal and go to their room in tears and even suicidal thoughts.
It's a tragedy, I think, actually, the number of teenagers that contemplate suicide as a result of feeling depressed. I mean, fortunately, the overwhelming majority of those individuals who think about it don't actually follow through. But some of them do, and it's often a result of undiagnosed or untreated depression.
Eric has a very personal awareness of the link between depression and suicide, and devotes much of his time to suicide prevention workshops in schools.
Not everybody that suffers from depression thinks about suicide or has thoughts about suicide. They don't. Yes?
Have you ever thought of committing suicide yourself?
That's a difficult question to answer, but the answer is yes, I have.
Even though Eric struggled with depression for many years, he and his wife, Shelley, didn't see signs of depression in their 15-year-old son, Jeff.
Jeff was doing a whole lot of sleeping. His friends would call, he didn't want to do anything with them, didn't want to see them, not wanting to go to school, headaches, stomach aches.
His whole demeanor kind of changed after a while. He was giving signs, he was talking to people, and nobody really picked up on it.
And we know these signs now. Unfortunately, we didn't know them at the time.
What eventually happened on one Saturday morning, I got a phone call from my wife, and she said that Jeff had taken his life. So he died by suicide. And he was 15 years old. If you ever have a thought like that, by the way, talk to somebody. And make sure they know that you're serious, this is what I'm thinking of.
A person who talks about death or suicide should be taken very seriously. If you or someone you know is considering suicide, seek help as soon as possible by contacting a mental health professional or calling 1-800-273-TALK to reach a trained crisis worker.
It's hard to separate between depression and suicide because the vast majority of suicides in the country and in the world are linked to depression.
My son was not under treatment for depression, and he had not been diagnosed with depression. But ironically, he did leave a suicide note. And in his note, he talked about not being happy. And we were not aware that he was that unhappy. I guess any death is painful, but to see this kind of death is just something that I see over and over in my mind because my daughter and my wife and I found my son, and he had shot himself, and that's a scene that will not just won't go away.
So if you see a teenage boy, for example, who used to be very animated and sort of an emotional person who turns into our stereotype of a teenage boy, yeah, whatever, that's okay, nothing, right? Should we be worried about that? And maybe having that conversation with the people that we care about, with our children, saying, look, I care about you, and I'm wondering, you seem less sort of up. You seem kind of down, and are you doing okay? And his response might be, not a big deal, whatever, but he'll hear you. And so it's worth raising the question.
I've been told that I can, reach a point where I'm happy again, but will I ever really do that? I mean, maybe, the doctor doesn't know everything. Maybe I'm that case where you don't get better, that I'm just going to succumb to this disease, even if I realize that it's an illness.
When someone is that despairing and that hopeless, and all aspects of their life seem to be in turmoil, and there's no real safe place, you would start, I think, with medication therapy pretty quickly, and we did.
Medication in this culture is something that you take when you have a major problem, right? So if a man is not seeing depression as a real serious problem, he's probably less likely to be interested in taking medication.
I can think of several doctors before saying, you might want to think about some antidepressants. And I would be like, no, it's not that bad. I'm not that bad. I'm so screwed up, but I'm not that messed up.
As I read some
Antidepressants affect patients differently, and many negative myths about their risks, side effects, and their effectiveness have dissuaded many from using them and caused others to stop. But there is compelling medical evidence from over 20 years of use that when taken as prescribed and monitored by a physician, antidepressant medications are safe and work for most patients.
It took some time to work, and it was like, I can't tell. I don't know. I don't know if I feel any better. I don't know if it's not working. And I talked to the pharmacist, and they'd say 4 to 6 weeks. Well, it's been 4 weeks. Well, it could be as long as 6 weeks. And it's like, what the? Come on. It took me 30 some odd years to get here, and you're telling me that it's going to take me another month and a half. But it started to feel better, and then it started to feel a little better, and it started to feel a little better than that, and it kept, until finally I felt like, once I felt up a little bit, that's when it really occurred to me that I've been operating with a low-grade depression for all of my life, because I hadn't felt like this at all.
Like medications for other illnesses, there are different types of antidepressants, some taken in combination and others by themselves. Because dosages and side effects vary from patient to patient, their use should involve regular monitoring by the prescribing doctor.
I do not believe in pills. I never took pills. I was against medication except for headache medication. But these antidepressants work. I am an example of a person who takes a morning medication and a person who on most days is back to his old self. And it's a wonderful, wonderful feeling.
It's part of who I am, depression is. But I don't fear it because I know what I have to do to keep it in control. And if my meds don't work one way, I know another way I can go. Or I have a doctor that will show me another way to go to get treatment for it.
It's very important for him that he stays compliant and stays on his medications to be able to function normally and to have a good life.
The one time that I wasn't compliant was because of a church. I was in a Bible study, and people were saying, if you're able to have enough faith, then you shouldn't have to take any medication. That's kind of an act of faith to not take medication. So I went off for 3 days, and in 3 days I had to go back to the hospital to get leveled out again. If it's something that basically with the chemicals of the mind, there's no reason why a minister wouldn't be just as likely to have that as anyone else.
I have to say, I've been doing really well.
I saw my primary care physician, and she sent me to a psychiatrist, and they diagnosed me with depression, and I've been in treatment since then. I'm taking medication, and I'm taking therapy as well. There's people that say you shouldn't take antidepressants, and I respect people that decide not to take medication for whatever reasons, but for me, they've been a lifesaver.
Careful, this is hot. I'm gonna put it.
I can't explain exactly what happens, only that I'm not sad as often. And even when I'm sad, it's to a manageable level. It's like walking around without glasses, and all of a sudden you put your glasses and everything is clear. That's the effect for me.
For chronic severe depression, a combination of therapy and medication are better than either one alone. How has your mood been?
You know what? I've just like this last, I don't know what it is, week or week and a half, just it's like I feel like I've run out of time, you know? Okay. Like, so stress is like coming up there. And I don't know if because I took on too much all at once or not, if that was it.
Deaths, assaults, divorces, moving, new jobs, all rank very high on the list of major stressors. One of the uniquely puzzling aspects of depression
That's actually a good analogy.
is linked to the fact that stress is the precipitant.
But it's not like that all the time. It's just, you know, every once in a while when I just get stacked up, all of a sudden it's like, you know, I hit the wall and it's like.
Being in treatment is hard work. If one's going to do it and make it effective, it truly takes an investment on the part of the person seeking the treatment, not just the one providing it.
But let's talk about the anger. I think that's something.
Psychotherapy is different from going to other doctors who we expect will do most of the work. Your therapist can't help unless you're willing to talk openly and honestly about yourself.
Can we start like
being aggressive and monitoring your own symptoms, keeping track of when do I get worse. Is this when job stresses occur? Is this something that happens when I forget my medications? Those are the things that are huge clues to clinicians. They often explain what's going on. When the person learns that, they are the most powerful force in the treatment.
When things were broken to the point that they were broken with me, you can simply say, okay, you're getting treatment, now let's go back to the way things were. There had to be a reestablishment of a connection and of trust. Do we know where to tell them where with Claire? We were able to establish communications in a way that we just had not been able to do when I was suffering from the worst of the depression.
I'm reading this book now. It's like about
and especially with my son, I was able to do things with him that wasn't just out of a sense of obligation or a sense of duty as a father. I was able to really enjoy doing things with them. There we go.
For Moises, recovery came in 2 steps. First, recovering from alcoholism. Second, getting professional help at a community mental health center for a condition he'd been self-medicating for years.
I was terrible with the depression. I had to keep like the alcohol, keep suffering until I cannot do it no more. And I have to ask for help. And I got the help from Dr. Galvis, but it took me a long years.
Dime una cosa, ¿tú crees que has pasado un día entero feliz este invierno?
Yo creo que sí.
¿Qué estabas haciendo ese día?
Estaba con mi nieto más pequeño. He told me, you have depression, you depressed. He told me, I can give you help. Send me to the therapy group and give me the medicine. And that's when I started getting well.
Moises found a new way to connect with his family when his daughters started their own families and needed help with childcare.
How are you?
Ay, te portas bien, okay? Bye-bye. And I turned around and it looked like the only person that was able to help me was my dad. So I was like, okay, my dad is going to help me.
Say bye to Mama. Say bye, Mama.
To this day, I think of some of the things I said, oh yeah, right. Me, leave my child with my dad, yeah, okay. But here we are, and that's the case. And it's like, so it's been about 2.5 years maybe of just me really trying to connect with him. I see how he interacts with Ethan, and although he wasn't there for us, he seems to be doing a really good job with our kids.
I feel renewed with this love of the children, and I think it's one of the things keep together, with my daughters. And try to be close and talk to my daughters and tell them how I'm sorry I feel. You have to learn from the experience, I have to keep the good things I learn, because my life is just to be really, well, I don't know, going wrong way. I think today I'm trying to go in the right way.
The lesson out of it for most of us is that you can come out of this, provided you seek treatment. That's not to say that people don't fall back into the ditch. I have been back into the ditch a few times. Usually that means staying in touch with your physician, monitoring your therapy, and being aware of when you're headed back.
It's when people hide back from each other and try to keep things secretive and not being able to communicate. That's when the problems arise. But when you share it with the person you love, you can get help together. Because if you don't do that, then the anger just builds up between the two of you, and just this huge wall forms.
We had a great, a start to our marriage, and then, in the middle of it got, rocky with, Jeff's death and everything else. And so she went through a whole lot. Look at some of the stuff that I've done, and it kind of hurts me to think, I played this on her, but in the same token, the outlook is great. Looking back on this, it's like another life. It's like looking at it and saying, that was a totally different person. How that was me?
Even after seeing this program, if you have depression, you may believe you still can't feel better than lousy. But you can, much better. Between you and better, there may be some obstacles. But as you've seen, treatment does work. We men are raised to believe living with pain is normal. To ignore it is manly, and we avoid doctors when we're ill. This is why our families and friends are so important. They can give us a push in the direction we really need to go. But we have to listen when they say, I think you may be depressed, and you need to get some help. Are you listening?
If you recognize the signs of depression in yourself or a loved one, you may need support right away. For free help, call 1-800-273-TALK, 1-800-273-8255. More information and resources about depression in men are available in English and Spanish online at mengetdepression.com and depresionyloshombres.com. This broadcast of Men Get Depression is available on DVD. Special features include 3 additional videos about depression in men of different ages and a printable resource booklet, all in English and Spanish. To order, call PBS Home Video at 1-800-PLAY-PBS or visit shoppbs.com.